My name is Mansah, and I am 18 years old. I live in a small village called Ahunjo, deep in the heart of Ghana. Life in the village is simple. The sun rises, we go to the farms, and the sun sets, we return home. It's always the same until that one day when everything changed. It started when I was walking to the market. The path to the market was a dusty road that snaked through a dense forest. It was a path I had walked 100 times before. The trees seemed alive with the sounds of birds and monkeys, and the air was thick with the smell of wet leaves and fresh earth. I had gotten used to it. But that day, something felt different. I noticed a shadow at the corner of my eye, but when I looked, no one was there. I kept walking, my heart beating a little faster. I told myself it was nothing, but then I saw it again, a figure, standing under one of the trees. It looked like a woman, but her face was blurred, almost like she was covered in mist. I blinked, and she was gone. That was the first time I saw her. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. Maybe I was tired from all the farm work the day before, or maybe it was a trick of the light. I didn't tell anyone, not even my mother. She wouldn't understand, and I didn't want to sound crazy. But as the days passed, the woman began to appear more often. Sometimes she would be standing near the well in the village square, sometimes by the river bank, always in that same white dress, always watching me. One day, I asked my best friend Abena if she had seen anything strange recently. Abena laughed and shook her head. Strange like what, Mansah? A goat that can talk? No, I said, feeling stupid. Just strange things. Like a woman, maybe. Dressed in white. Abena stopped laughing and looked at me seriously. Mansah, you're not joking, are you? I shook my head. Maybe you've been working too hard, let's go to the river. It will clear your mind. Abena said, but I could tell she was trying to brush it off. The river was where all the kids went after school to cool off. The water was clear, and the trees around it gave good shade. As we sat by the bank, skipping stones, I tried to forget about the woman. But then, I saw her again, standing on the other side of the river, her feet barely touching the ground. I jumped up, pointing. There. Do you see her now? Abena followed my finger, but her eyes only landed on the empty bank. See what? There's nothing there, Mansah. Frustration and fear bubbled inside me. She's right there. I shouted. How can you not see her? But Abena looked at me like I had lost my mind. He grabbed my arm. Mansah, there's no one there. You're scaring me. That night, I couldn't sleep. The woman was all I could think about. Who was she? Why could only I see her? And what did she want from me? The next morning, I decided to visit Nana Yaa, the village elder. She was known to have wisdom beyond the ordinary. People went to her when they were troubled, and she always seemed to know what to say. I found her sitting on a wooden stool outside her hut, weaving a basket. Her white hair was tied back in a scarf, and her face was wrinkled with age, but her eyes were sharp and full of life. Nana, I need to talk to you, I said, sitting down beside her. She looked at me with a soft smile. What troubles you, my child? I hesitated, then told her everything. About the woman, about how no one else could see her, and about how she seemed to be following me. Nana Yaa listened carefully, not interrupting once. When I finished, she nodded slowly. What you see, Mansah, is not of this world. I swallowed hard. What do you mean? There are spirits all around us, she said. Some good, some bad. Most people cannot see them, but some, like you, have been given the gift, or curse, of sight. Why me? I asked, my voice trembling. That I do not know, she said, placing a hand on my shoulder. But you must be careful. Not all spirits have good intentions. Her words sent a chill down my spine. For the first time, I realized how serious this was. I wasn't imagining things. The woman was real, or at least, real in a way that no one else could understand. Is there a way to make her go away? I asked. Nana Yaa shook her head. The spirits will do what they want. But you can protect yourself. Come back tomorrow, and I will prepare something for you. I thanked her and left, feeling a little better, though the fear still lingered in my chest. That night, I stayed up, waiting to see if the woman would appear again. And she did. This time, she was closer than ever before, standing just outside my window, her hand pressed against the glass. I froze, unable to move, as her eyes met mine. There was something sad in her gaze, something that made me almost feel sorry for her. But then, as quickly as she had appeared, she vanished into the night. The next morning, I returned to Nana Yaa's hut. She handed me a small pouch filled with herbs and a string of beads. Keep this with you at all times, she said. It will protect you from harm. I nodded and took the pouch, feeling its weight in my hand. But deep down, I wasn't sure if it would be enough. The woman wasn't just a spirit. She was something more. Something that wanted something from me. The days passed, and though I kept the pouch with me, the woman didn't stop appearing. But now, there was something different. She wasn't just watching me anymore. She was trying to speak. I couldn't hear her words, but I could see her lips moving, her hands reaching out toward me. I was terrified, but at the same time, I felt like she was trying to tell me something important. One evening, as I was sitting by the river alone, she appeared again. This time, I didn't run. I stood my ground, my heart pounding in my chest. What do you want from me? I shouted into the air. She didn't answer, but she raised her hand and pointed to the water. Slowly, I walked to the edge of the riverbank and looked down. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. But then, I noticed something shiny in the mud. I reached down and pulled it out, a small, golden bracelet, covered in dirt. I turned it over in my hands, confused. Why had the woman led me to this? Then I remembered something my grandmother had told me when I was younger. There had been a girl from our village who had gone missing many years ago. She had been playing by the river, and no one ever saw her again. All they found was her bracelet. My heart skipped a beat. Was this the same bracelet? And if it was, what did that mean? The woman appeared again, standing across the river, her eyes locked on mine. This time, I understood. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She was trying to tell me her story, to ask for help. I stared at the bracelet, my fingers trembling. It was heavy, not just in weight, but in meaning. The missing girl, I finally understood. The spirit that had been haunting me, following me around, wasn't evil. She was the girl who had disappeared from the village all those years ago. The girl they never found. Her story had been a sad one. My grandmother used to tell it when we gathered around the fire at night. Ekua, that was her name. She was only 12 when she went missing. One afternoon, she had gone to fetch water from the river and never returned. The village searched for her, but there was no trace, only whispers of a curse that had taken her. They said the river spirits might have claimed her, but no one knew for sure. Her parents grieved, but life moved on, as it always does in the village. But Ekua hadn't moved on. She was here, right in front of me, and she needed something from me. The next few days were filled with tension. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. But who would believe me? If I told the village that Ekua was trying to reach out from the spirit world, they would think I had lost my mind. Still, I couldn't ignore her. Every day, she appeared, her eyes pleading, her fingers pointing toward the river. I knew she wanted me to do something, but I didn't know what. One evening, I went back to Nana Yaa. I told her about the bracelet, and about how I believed it belonged to Ekua. Nana Yaa's face grew serious. Ekua, she whispered, the name heavy on her tongue. I remember her. The whole village mourned her. If her spirit is reaching out to you, Mansah, it means she is not at peace. She has unfinished business in this world. But what am I supposed to do? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. I don't even know why she's here. Nana Yaa thought for a moment, then spoke slowly. Spirits do not linger without reason. Perhaps her body was never found. Perhaps her spirit is tied to this world because she needs to be properly laid to rest. I swallowed hard. The thought of going into the river to search for a body, especially one that had been lost for years, made my skin crawl. But if that was what needed to be done, how could I refuse? Go to the river at night, Nana Yaa continued, her voice low. When the moon is full, the spirits are strongest. Offer her the bracelet. If she accepts it, she may show you what needs to be done. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of Nana Yaa's words heavy on my mind. The moon was full, casting a pale light through my window. I couldn't sleep, and in my heart, I knew what I had to do. I waited until the house was quiet and my parents were asleep before I slipped out into the night, the bracelet tucked safely in my pocket. The village was silent as I made my way to the river. The only sound was the wind rustling through the trees and the soft hum of crickets. My feet felt heavy as I walked, each step filling me with dread. But I had come too far to turn back now. When I reached the riverbank, the moonlight reflected off the water, making it shimmer like glass. I stood there for a moment, clutching the bracelet, my heart pounding in my chest. Then I saw her. Ekua stood on the other side of the river, her white dress glowing in the moonlight, her eyes fixed on mine. This time, she looked different. Her face was no longer blurred. I could see her clearly now, the round cheeks, the small nose, the sadness in her eyes. I stepped closer to the water, holding out the bracelet. "Is this what you want?" I asked, my voice shaking. She didn't speak, but she nodded, her eyes never leaving mine. Slowly, I knelt down and placed the bracelet at the edge of the riverbank. My hands were trembling, and my heart was racing so fast it felt like it might burst out of my chest. The night was eerily quiet now, as if the entire world was holding its breath. As soon as the bracelet touched the ground, the air around me grew colder, and the river began to ripple, though there was no wind. I could feel her presence stronger than ever before. Ekua stepped forward, walking across the surface of the water as if it were solid ground. My breath caught in my throat as she stopped right in front of me, close enough for me to see the tears glistening in her eyes. For the first time, I heard her voice. It was soft, barely more than a whisper, but it echoed in my mind. "Thank you." I wanted to ask her what she needed, why she had been haunting me, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I watched as she knelt down, her hands hovering over the bracelet. Her fingers touched it lightly, and the moment she did, the ground beneath us began to tremble. The riverbank shifted, and a section of the earth beside me crumbled, revealing something buried beneath the surface, something old and decayed. It was a skeleton. The bones were worn and covered in dirt, but there was no mistaking what it was. I stared at it, my mouth dry. This must have been Ekua's body, lost all these years, hidden under the earth by the riverbank where she had disappeared. Ekua knelt beside the skeleton, her fingers brushing against the bones. A sadness filled the air, heavy and suffocating, but I understood now. She hadn't wanted to harm me. She had just wanted to be found. To be remembered. I looked at her, and for the first time, I felt something other than fear. I felt sorrow. Sorrow for this girl who had been lost and forgotten by everyone except me. What do I do now? I asked her, my voice trembling. She didn't speak, but I knew the answer. She needed a proper burial, a final resting place where she could finally be at peace. With shaking hands, I picked up the bones and carefully wrapped them in my clothes. The weight of them was nothing compared to the weight of what I was about to do. I carried the remains back through the forest, the path illuminated by the soft glow of the moon. Ekua followed behind me, her presence still strong, but no longer terrifying. Now, it felt peaceful. When I reached the edge of the village, I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed help. I went straight to Nana Yaa's hut and knocked softly on the door. She opened it, her eyes wide when she saw what I was carrying, but she didn't ask any questions. She just nodded, as if she had expected this all along. "We will give her the peace she deserves," Nana Yaa said softly. Together, we dug a grave at the edge of the village, beneath the baobab tree that stood tall and ancient, its roots deep in the earth. It was a place of honor, a place where the ancestors watched over the living and the dead. As we buried the bones, I felt a weight lift from my chest. Ekua's spirit hovered nearby, watching us silently. When the last of the earth was placed over her grave, she looked at me one final time, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered again, her voice a soft breeze in the night air. And then, slowly, she faded away, her form dissolving into the moonlight, leaving only a soft glow where she had stood. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of calm. Ekua was gone, finally at peace, and I knew that I had done the right thing. The next morning, the village awoke to news of the burial. Word spread quickly, and soon everyone was talking about how the remains of the long-lost Ekua had been found and laid to rest. Some were skeptical, others whispered of the spirits, but no one doubted Nana Yaa's wisdom. She told the village that Ekua's spirit had finally found peace, and that was enough for them. As for me, life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after everything I had seen. I no longer saw Ekua or any other spirits, but I knew they were still out there, watching, waiting. I had been given a glimpse into a world most people never see, and I would never forget it. But I also knew one thing for sure: I was no longer afraid. I had faced the unknown and survived. And even though I didn't understand why I had been chosen to see Ekua's spirit, I was grateful. Grateful that I could help her, grateful that I had been given the chance to do something good.